Hi, everyone. Welcome to an interview that we are hosting today with Barbara Briggs from 350 DC. And we are hosting this interview at a moment in history or a climate history where local elected officials in the District of Columbia approved a landmark bill called the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Amendment Act of 2018, a mouthful, which was a landmark climate bill to transition the district to 100% clean energy by 2032 and to invest millions of dollars in clean energy and sustainability projects that will benefit all Washington, D.C. residents. This was a result of years of coalition building with local climate, energy, and environmental justice leaders, which made this bill one of the most, if not the most, ambitious pieces of climate legislation in the country, as well as a huge victory for climate justice. Thank you, Barbara, for interviewing with us today.
Hi.
So I just wanted you to do a quick little intro about yourself and the work of 350 DC, and just to tell our audience more about this bill and why people should care about it.
Great. I'm excited, and my DC chapter mates are very excited about this interview.
And just start us off with talking about the bill and just a general summary of the key points and why people should jump up and down in excitement that this happened.
Sure. Well, just to start with, the bill that we ultimately won was not what we were first shooting for, but it's awesome. The first campaign as it developed was for a carbon fee and rebate. In other words, put a tax on fossil fuels and rebate most of the money back to the residents of Washington, D.C. What happened last summer was that there was a quick turnaround, in the city council, and they proposed a more detailed and a little bit more of a complicated bill, but it's excellent, and it really rode on the energy that our coalition had developed over the prior couple of years. And I think that it's become a very strong bill, and a bill that is good for low income and communities of color in DC, because of the strength of the coalition and with a very considerable contribution from our 350 chapter. What the bill does is, it's a long name, the Clean Energy Omnibus Amendment Act of 2018. But what that means is that there are a bunch of pieces of it, and I'll give you a few of them. It strengthens Washington, D.C.'s renewable portfolio standard for electricity so that the city is buying more and more electricity sourced from renewable energy. Until by 2032, 100% of all our electricity will come from renewable energy. It also will come largely from regional sources and largely from long-term contracts, meaning contracts of 7 years plus. What that does is guarantee the small solar and wind companies the ability to install new renewable energy capacity in our electric region. In other words, not just buying not just buying wind energy from someplace far away, but it basically will promote the building of new renewable capacity here in our region, which is something very cool because it'll guarantee that there'll be an income flow because of those contracts. It also increases the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund. It's a small fee on fossil fuels of all kinds, fossil fuels that are used for electric, on fossil fuels, or on natural gas and on fuel oil. And that money is going to be used to fund a green bank, to fund energy conservation projects, to fund retrofitting of buildings, to fund distributive energy like rooftop solar, So the money will be there for the conversion from fossil fuels to renewable energy, which is what we need to do. The bill also institutes much stronger standards for existing buildings. 75% of the energy that we use here in Washington, because we don't have industry, we don't have great big, energy consuming other kinds of things, but a lot of our energy just flies through the windows and doors of old buildings. So it establishes much stronger standards on existing buildings, but with a time frame and paths for compliance so that wasteful water heaters and bad insulation and leaky roofs can be fixed over time. And again, the Green Bank will be there to help finance that happening, and especially making money available for lower income communities. There are also some transportation measures. The Department of Transportation is directed to revamp vehicle excise taxes so that gas guzzler vehicles have to pay a higher excise tax, and energy efficient vehicles then pay a much lower excise tax. But low-income families who are maybe stuck with a secondhand car that uses a lot of gas, but who are below the poverty line, don't have to pay that money. And the mayor is also given authority to join regional transportation initiatives, meaning if Maryland or Virginia establish a gas tax, we can join it so that auto fuel will be taxed. In other words, encouraging public transportation. And the bill does a few other things, but maybe that's already too far down in the weeds. It does a lot, and it's expected that we're gonna be about twice as energy efficient within not too many years. And the economic analysis that our coalition has run is saying that overall this will be actually favorable to low-income communities. And I should point out that the concern for equity is something that was a value of the entire coalition. It was also something that our group really pressed that discussion and brought it into the open, and in many ways helped to lead it. And that aspect of the coalition and the campaign effort, I think, not only was important because it was the right thing to do, but in some ways it made our coalition stronger. It brought in different communities, and it made us much more resilient to some of the attacks and the efforts to undermine and weaken the bill in a way that, I'd be happy to talk about more.
Yeah, that's incredible. So would you say that this bill is unprecedented? Do you think you created a new stage in climate action history?
I think so. I think that this bill put us at the forefront, or put Washington, D.C. at the forefront of cities in some ways. 100% electric by 2032 puts us way at the front of the pack. I mean, that's a faster time frame than I think any other city in the country. Excuse me, I'm fighting a cold here, and it sounds like my voice is starting to go. Also, the fact that this was a coalition effort and that this ended up, DC is a very aspirational city. We have good climate goals. It's a very progressive city. But I think that in many ways, people were expecting this to be an aspirational bill. And what one very high level member or staffer of the mayoral administration ended up saying was the freight train of the coalition drove this bill further and made it stronger than anybody had contemplated its being. And it was a movement effort and a movement win.
Wow. And I just am really impressed by the equity piece of the work that you all have done. And I'm sure that there was a lot of struggle, but also joy that must have come from that experience. And I'm just wanting to know a bit more about how you engage low-income communities and communities of color to support a bill like this that from some people may view this as like another like environmental bill that's going to cost a lot of money and affect a lot of communities and push a lot of people to the sidelines. So how are you all able to think critically about that and carefully?
Sure. I mean, the issue of equity and, this bill not harming low-income people was something that, everybody was saying was important. It's something that there's a high level of agreement about here in DC specifically, and probably in other places too. I'll say that for me, in the back of my head, I probably held a more sort of traditional environmentalist uh, feeling about it, which is, for God's sake, the planet is burning. You know, how good is it going to be for our kids to be suffering from more and more asthma and not be able to go outside? How good is it going to be for low income communities when old people are dropping like flies in heat waves? How good is it going to be when we have hurricanes running through, flooding DC and flooding other cities and wrecking billions of dollars in the economy? That's no good. And so let's compare that cost to, $3 or $4 or $5 increase in utility bills, and let's get real here. And so that was sort of in the back of my head a little bit. And we and then we had a DC 350 chapter meeting that was an incredibly tough meeting. I and a couple of people had been really much more engaged with this campaign, and there were some other members of our chapter who had been a bit less engaged with this coalitional work, because 350 DC does other things as well, but we're very concerned about the equity piece. And what some of them said was, look, and it's true. They said, look, $3 might not seem like a lot to you, but at the end of the month, that could mean, dinner for a single mother and her kids. That for families who are struggling for every penny and every dollar, and who have suffered more because of climate change, because of the heat, because of utility bills, than people with more money, it's not fair to put even an extra dollar in their budget. So that's not right, and we won't have it. And I got that, and we talked further, and we knew that the coalition, talked a lot about equity, but we raised it as an issue with, some of the members of our 350 chapter really taking the lead. And what came out of that was a very serious equity working group within the coalition that met, that did solid assessments on the language around housing, on the language around transportation, on the language around bills, and came up with concerns and language that could allay those concerns. And so it was I think, a very deep process that made the entire coalition take this equity piece to a different level. That conversation happening, being taken seriously, led us also in our organizing to reach out to low-income housing groups, to the elderly, to wards 6 and 7 and 5, which are high proportions of communities of color, and to do our organizing, not just for numbers, but in a different way, speaking to those concerns. And I think that what that did was it not only grew our coalition larger, but it made us stronger. It brought us to a sort of a broader sense and a very deep sense of a we that was different than we would have achieved otherwise. And I should say also, um, first of all, another thing that 350 DC took a piece of was organizing in the neighborhoods. We helped with coordinating and reaching out to, here in DC, we have advisory neighborhood councils, which are subsections of the wards of the city where neighbors come and they talk about um, housing issues and parking issues and transportation issues and safety issues. And they also have the right to pass resolutions on issues that are important to them. And so we passed a whole series of resolutions in support of the bill. But that was a really good platform for raising the issue of climate change, talking about what the issues were, talking about what the concerns were, and talking with neighbors, ordinary people all over the city, and frankly, building support for this thing. In some of those meetings, the electric company, Pepco, was going to a lot of them, and the word had trickled around to the business development district folks. And I was astonished. I mean, we saw electric company, the utilities company, rise up at some of these meetings and some of the hearings and speak as if they were the great defenders of the poor and of low-income people and people of color. And they were saying, well, the utility bills will increase under this plan and we can't have that and we're very deeply concerned and blah, blah, blah. And as a result of this process and the organizing that we did, and also the very deep sort of analysis and policy development that we did, we were able to say, wait a minute, that's not true. And we have the community here representing itself. Let's hear what they have to say.
Wow.
So
that's awesome.
It was awesome.
So when people talk about this concept of like a just transition, that can sound like a kind of a wonky term where it's like, what are we transitioning to? What is justice when it comes to building a clean and sustainable future for communities on the ground? And I'm just wondering, in your view, how did you feel like a just transition is played out with creating this bill and moving things forward in such a timely fashion? How do you think the process of coalition building gave you hope that a just transition could be possible in the U.S.?
Well, I mean, it's a process, obviously, but I think that the overall vision that when we have windmills that will last for 50 years and take a lot less work, take a lot less maintenance than a fossil fuel plant, and don't pollute. When we have solar energy, which is giving low-income homeowners and apartment renters a piece of the rock, a piece of of being able to have their own energy and be part of the grid, or be part, when we have these things in place, it will be a cleaner environment, and it can be a more equitable environment. But we need to know that there's that vision there. We need to know it's going to cost money, and it's simply a matter of it's our money. It's our money and it's our priorities, and we mustn't let the utility companies insist on business as usual or on foot dragging. A very interesting thing happened toward the end of this whole process. I expected the electric company here to foot drag and to lead with, well, we have to make nuclear a renewable energy source because we know they've got a lot of nuclear. And I really expected them to be saying, no, we have to go more slowly, and nuclear is a renewable. They didn't do that. They did something very interesting instead. they said, yes, um, we need to move to renewables. We need to do it quickly. We need to electrify public transit, and we need to electrify our vehicle systems. And we, the electric company, want to own it. We want this law to give us the right to do the research, to develop the project, to build the charging stations, to plan the transition process, and make a profit over the whole thing. And to me, that was a very interesting play to keep control in the corporate sector and to keep. They know they know that they've lost the battle about, is climate change real and is it urgent. They know it's real, they know it's urgent, and they know everybody knows it. Now they want to keep owning. They want to keep owning and they want to keep profiting. They didn't win that battle. We maintained a good segment of community control and an equitable system, and one where they didn't like walk away with the ball.
Wow. That's awesome also.
Yeah, it was interesting.
I'm just wondering, like, do you feel like this was only possible in Washington, D.C.? Do you think other cities could do this? I'm just wondering if you think that the community power and what you all built is unique to D.C., or you're really trying to push this in other cities, that other people can do this too?
I think every city has its own strengths and weaknesses. I mean, we have a lot of policy wonks here. And we definitely have some things that made this particular thing possible, and we're a big city with a robust public transit system, and that's going to be affected, and that counts. But I think every city has resources, and every city has the ability to govern pieces of itself. And I think that communities have to identify their own resources and really sort of what they can do. I mean, we don't have compressor stations, which are a big issue. There are communities that have compressor stations, that have pipelines. There are communities that have the ability to do a lot more local solar energy than we particularly have the capacity to do. I think every city and community has the ability to contribute to this process and to reach out to others to figure out how we're going to do it together.
And how do you feel like working with 350 DC has like empowered you in your own work on climate action?
For me, 350 has been really central. I did human and labor rights work for many, many years. And I came to DC to do a temporary gig. And when that ended, I was looking around for something to do, and somebody passed me a flyer about a meeting that turned out to be a 350 DC meeting, where they talked about this campaign, but also about some other campaigns that 350 and others were doing. The 350 local chapter had brought, had organized this meeting, but had brought in the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, which was central in facilitating the clean energy campaign, and Ann Sierra Club and other groups that we work with in the coalition, and they brought me in, and have also been really key in helping discuss the issue, in skills building, in leadership development. I have learned a ton from the 350 chapter about democratic leadership, and and democratic and transparent leadership, and networking and organizing skills. And I think that that's a lovely thing about 350, is that the national organization makes those skills freely accessible and allows us to be in communication with other chapters and to share skills really freely.
So we're unfortunately running out of time, but I wanted to ask you one last question about what's next. There are local groups around the world who want to push forward their own fossil-free campaigns. And as someone who pushed forward a very successful fossil-free campaign of your own, I just want to know what your recommendation would be for those groups on what they should do to also claim a victory.
I think that there are a few elements that are important. One thing that happened at the beginning of this process, excuse me, I now have to start again. Yeah. I think there are a few important things. One thing that the coalition did at the beginning of this process before I came on board was did a consultative outreach sort of strategy and policy discussion with different groups. The CCAN group brought together all different groups to discuss what were the strengths and opportunities that we had here, and to come to to come to an agreement on something that we could work on together here in DC. I think that local groups should not be afraid to reach out to others, to seek allies, to to try to establish a big tent, and also don't be afraid of not being the boss of it. If the local Sierra Club or the Citizen Climate Lobby or some other group in town is starting an initiative that seems positive, there's no problem with working on it and using our strengths and talents, or your group's strengths and talents, to take that further and to make allies and to make one big community of climate action, because you'll get further, you'll get more done by doing that. 350 has a lot of expertise, a lot of skill sets to offer, a lot of information to share, and helping to bring together, to build or to contribute to that kind of coalition will strengthen the overall effort, and it will strengthen your organization and our organization.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and your information about this historic win. Thank you for all the work that you do for this fight.
Well, we're excited and really, really excited to share it. So thank you.